Hey Brad, how are
How
you
you doing
today?
today? Good. How are
Uh,
you?
I'm doing great. Hey, thanks for joining me today. I know this was kind of short notice, um, but I wanted to ask you if I could just a few questions regarding domestic violence in your community and get your thoughts on current trends and outcomes of policies that are currently in place. Do you have time to do that with me now?
Sure.
Awesome. So, Brad, how long have you been on the force?
I've got 31 and a half years in law enforcement.
Oh my goodness. And where are you located?
I'm in Lakeport, California, which is in um, Northern California, probably about 2 hours northeast of San Francisco and 2 hours northwest of Sacramento.
Wow, I bet it's beautiful up there right now.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, regarding domestic violence, with 1 in 4 women having documented experiences with that in their lifetime, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of abuse. What is your number annually? Do you have any idea? And how do you rank nationally?
Well, in our jurisdiction, we're a smaller city within a rural county. In our city, I believe we have between 30 and 40 actual domestic violence incidents per year.
Wow, that's really low.
Um, we have probably about 5,000 community calls for assistance per year, and then another 5,000 officer initiated activities. And for the most part, domestic violence report would come in through a citizen generated call. Once in a while, an officer will um, kind of fall into a situation that they might witness something and out on the street, and it turns out to be a domestic violence. I think of one last 4th of July where I was out with the staff because it was a busy night, and we uh, we passed a vehicle where we could see a male and female in a heated argument in the vehicle, and it was also traveling kind of recklessly. And so we pulled it over, and just as we did, we also got a report that a domestic violence had occurred in a parking lot of a grocery store with those folks in that vehicle matching that description. And of course, we had already just stopped it, and it turned out that the female had been physically um, assaulted by the husband,
Mm.
and so we were able to solve that case. But that's just an example of sometimes you'll see something before a call comes in, but for the most part, they get called in. And like I said, the 36 or so that are classified as actual domestic violences that would be reported with to the state under our crime reporting would be between 30 and 40. I
Gotcha.
don't recall what the numbers are in our county right now. I know our domestic violence resource center does keep track of how many calls or incidents per year with the various agencies, but I would say that's a fairly low number. I don't know how it matches up annually to the what would be determined as, say, domestic violence incidents per 100,000 population.
Right.
Um,
So do you
so
have a dedicated team just for DV, or is it just you like train your officers across the board for it?
we train all of our officers to handle it. We don't have a specific domestic violence response unit within our department. We do have a lot of policies that regulate and state how we're required to handle those. And then, of course, our officers get trained on how to do that. And that policy also encompasses all the state laws that we're required to follow with regard to those investigations. We do have connections to outside resources that we will follow up with after the main incident is over, such as our resource center and our prosecution office, regarding any follow up that might be needed.
Oh,
So
very
in
good.
in that sense, there's kind of a team of different groups that does respond to it, but not a, like some bigger police departments would have a domestic violence detective.
Gotcha. Now, is there any follow-up once you release these people to any of your support personnel outside of the station?
There's
Is
almost
there,
always follow up because, for one, you want to follow up with the victim to see if, sometimes you want to get additional pictures of injuries that might show or develop since the time of the incident. There's oftentimes, follow-up statements that need to be taken regarding historical information, because oftentimes, that this might be the first time that law enforcement has been involved, but that victim may have been abused many times, and we need to gather that information to present as part of the case.
do you find that, is there a majority or a specific percentage you think that once you've been called, that when you return the call, they say there's no problem and I've forgiven him and we don't need any more follow-up, we're good?
That's very common. In fact, even to the extent that sometimes they'll tell us that what they reported isn't what happened, that they don't want to prosecute, they want to drop the case, they don't want to talk anymore. That's part of the cycle of violence. If the suspect gets back to them, we'll try to intimidate them and make them change their mind. But we still continue forward with the case. Now it does become difficult to prosecute it when your victim won't testify or goes in front of the jury and says that they what they originally told us is not what happened. It's pretty hard to get a jury to hand down a conviction when now
Right.
you don't know what the truth is. But generally, that's why we try to do a good investigation at the beginning. And even if the victim changes their mind, we have the evidence already.
I have
And
a couple of other, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a couple of other friends who are police officers, and uh, I think they may have gotten a bit jaded over the years for having uh, gone to a courtroom and seen the same woman over and over again next to the same abuser, and she keeps forgiving them. And she keeps going back and ending up back in the courthouse because he continues to abuse her. So what would you tell a woman right now, if you had an opportunity, what would you tell that woman sitting next to her abuser?
while she was sitting next to them, or,
Well, I mean, like just that particular woman, if you had a chance to say something to her, maybe someone who's listening right now, what would you tell her in this moment?
well, I would tell them that I would explain, the cycle of the violence, and I would explain the kind of things that the suspect is going to do to try to get them to forgive them. I would explain the intimidation, the things they're going to say, and um, that it's not going to change the cycle of violence, and that they have an opportunity right now to let us help them. And the best thing they can do is to listen to us and engage the resources that we're presenting them
Yeah, let you
to
help.
get their self out of the situation. I would explain to them situations where I've seen this exact thing happen, and the victim get abused again to the point of even homicide, because I've
Mm.
had that situation where I've had a serious domestic violence, and the the victim ended up back with the suspect and ultimately ended up being murdered.
Wow.
So, I would explain to them that they need to understand that what the perpetrator is going to try to do, and that this is their opportunity to get out of the situation.
Awesome. Well, let me
And
bring it home just a little bit for you personally. So working with these types of calls and these type of relationships, and you're witnessing this over the period of 31 years, um, your thinking on marriage and relationships and men and women, has that changed over the years? Like, where are you now in your personal thinking of relationships in general?
Well, I mean, I understand these things happen, and in a relationship or a marriage, there's always going to be some. I would think it's pretty rare that there's never an argument on something. But you know, I try to let people know that that's going to happen, and you just need to find a way to work it out peacefully. And violence is never the answer to handle that. So I guess I've based on what I've seen, I would be I would say it's probably helped my relationship. I've been married for 29 years this year, and we've not had domestic violence.
Awesome.
Now we've argued and had fights and stuff like that, but I don't think, not physical fights, but I don't think that's unusual for a married couple to have some disagreements over the course of many years.
Some discord, sure. Actually, that
It's
reminds me, someone recently told me that there's a lot of abuse inside police persons' marriages. Do you find any truth to that statement just because they're kind of a tough guy job and a horrible job sometimes, and then they come home to a wife? Is there any truth to that?
I've seen domestic violence incidents in law enforcement officers that have engaged in it. I don't think it's a high number. I don't think it's rampant within law enforcement, but you have to understand. I mean, law enforcement officers are hired from the human race, and anything that you have in the human population, you can have, perpetrated by a law enforcement officer. Now we try to screen that out, and for the most part, probably less than 1/2 of 1% of police officers engage in misconduct. It sometimes the public thinks it's more because when those things happen, it becomes a if it makes it into the national media, it looks like it's bigger than it is.
Gotcha.
And so it does happen. I don't think it's a high percentage, but this is a job where you're under a lot of stress, and a lot of times you will take it out on your family potentially. I don't think that's a high percentage, but it's no different than anyone else lashing out at a family member about some stress at work. There's many jobs that could happen in. Uh,
Probably in your job though, you have policies or procedures in place for that. When that does happen, there is some format to go through, like therapy or time off or
yeah,
combination of things, where most companies don't have that.
we have all the psychological and employee assistance resources where we try to practice early intervention, which is currently one of the 8 most critical areas in law enforcement would be early intervention and catching, um, seeing where an officer might be going off track and trying to catch that earlier and get the intervention to get them back on track.
Awesome. Awesome.
So, and then I wanted to, before I forget, you mentioned that um, an officer becoming jaded maybe after seeing the same victim many times, and I've seen that as well, and not just with this type of a crime, but others. But we have to train our officers to realize that that's part of the cycle of violence, and we can't get frustrated. We can't give up on helping a victim just because we've responded 15 times. We can't refuse or stop helping. We have to understand that the victim's being victimized again, and we need to handle that. And that's done through proper training and setting the right examples.
Is there anything that happens? I don't know if it's by state or if it's kind of across the nation. Like, if there's if you see the abuse, can you just bring him in? Does she have to say yes? I want to press
Now,
charges.
now, years ago, it used to be that way, but for many years in California, under our law, at the scene of a domestic violence, we are required by law to make a determination of who the primary aggressor is. And then we are required by law to make an arrest.
Oh, wow.
We have to make an arrest of the primary aggressor.
Mm.
And what that means is, like a lot of times the victim will fight back. Um, and so then the suspect will say, well, I have an injury, she hit me, try to turn it around. But we have to do a thorough investigation and determine who the primary aggressor was. That doesn't mean who made the worst injury or anything. It's who is the aggressor that's causing this violence. And typically that's the abuser,
Right.
that has the practice of that. And we have to make that arrest. Now, I don't know that it's that way in every state.
Okay.
There's some states that may not have mandatory arrest, but we do. And we are potentially committing a crime if we do not do that.
Wow. Wow. So have you seen, since you've been in the force, on the force, a rise in domestic violence? Is it based on population if there is a rise, or has it just kind of stayed the same? It just doesn't go away?
No, I think it's been over my career probably fairly steady. I've never studied, rise and fall of the numbers, but I think, it depends on the community, and some communities might have more than others, but um, and it also, I think it depends on the level of education and outreach that a community has that goes to prevent some of that stuff. This is not the type of crime that's easy to prevent.
Right.
It's not. I would say it's not necessarily a preventable crime, unless you're getting the right outreach out there and the right education.
So speaking of that, with the advent of safe houses, educating the public, all the laws that are on the books now, you guys are more educated than ever, probably. In your opinion, what is currently available, is that working?
I believe it is. We've had strong relationships with our domestic violence resource center, as well as our prosecution office. Every prosecution office in California has a victim witness assistance division. They also assist victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse and various other things that are mandated by state law. But then we have the nonprofit domestic violence center that actually does the majority of the work with victims. And with our relationship with them and outreach over the years, I think that's led to reducing the numbers.
Nice. That's
But
awesome.
again, not maybe every community might not have the same outside team resources. But we do things like we partner, you know, on our own to go out and do things to help raise awareness. Like in the fall, Domestic Violence Prevention Month. You know, we've gone down, worked with local businesses, and we have a donut shop that will oftentimes, like, they'll make donuts that have so
Purple.
domestic violence, purple is the color.
Uh-huh.
They'll make the purple frosting and then they'll sell those. We'll go down and market and try to get people to participate, and then they donate all the money to the shelter.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
Sounds like
then
you're very collaborative, and that's
yeah, and
very
then we
good.
do pictures with officers supporting that, and we'll go to their outreach events and walks. And for many years I would usually speak at their events every
Nice.
year. um, we've served on their councils and boards. We've done training for their response people.
And now
So
you've connected with me, and you're helping me out way over here in North Carolina to
right,
get the word out and spread it nationally and
correct.
do what we can. I love that. And thank you so much for that. I appreciate everything that you do on a daily basis. I appreciate your wife putting up with you for 29 years. I think that's awesome. I'm probably also going to do some videos on happy couples, happily married couples. So maybe I will see you again if your wife would come on and share
Yeah,
what's worked, what hasn't worked, how you've stayed together this long. Because I think this time of age, anybody who stays married longer than 10 years is like a hero in my book.
yeah.
That's pretty awesome
Well,
news.
it's not easy. I've missed many holidays, more than I've ever been home, and missed kid events and um, all that stuff. Getting called out, having to work shift work, and major cases where you work for 48 hours or 24 hours and you don't come home. And so it's not necessarily a easy job for a spouse to have their spouse do.
Right. No, I get that, and I commend you both for staying together through all of that. So I think that wraps it up for us. I'm so appreciative of your time, Brad, and we'll just close out and stay with me, and I'll be right back with you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.